Well, hello everyone. It's been a minute. I am back. I want to give a heartfelt thank you to everybody who was so understanding when I announced about 8 months ago that I needed to go on hiatus. I needed to step away from the Deep Dive project for a while. It was 100% the right call for me to make at that point, but I'm back now. And I'm going to talk about all of that a little bit more towards the end of this video, but for now, let's go ahead and get into the reason why all of you have clicked on this video in the first place. Let's talk about Opus Dei. Roll the intro. So after I made that announcement 8 months ago and took a step back from all of this, that does not mean that I stopped paying attention. I have a Google alert set up for various keywords pertinent to Opus Dei, and that filter continued to populate results and send them into my inbox nearly every single day. So I have been seeing everything that has been playing out in the Opus Dei sphere, and believe me, I have some thoughts. It has been a pretty significant past 8 months, but the thing that happened that I think is perhaps the most significant, at least from the perspective of trying to make this information more accessible to the general public, is the story that ABC's Four Corners did about the 2 Opus Dei schools in New South Wales, Australia. If you have not seen this story, I will link it in the description of this video, along with all of my other sources, as per usual. It is worth watching. They pretty much hit every single nail on the head. I could not find any fault with the story. It is impeccable journalism. I can only hope that someday my quality of research is as professional and polished as this story was. It was really, really excellent. And I want to spend some time reacting to it and talking about it with you guys today because there are some key things in this documentary that really stood out to me. And I have rewatched it now 3 times in preparation for this video, and every single time it hits me like a punch in the gut, and I really think that we should talk about it. I am not going to be reacting to every single clip in this video because it's a 47-minute long video and that would take quite some time. So if you haven't seen it, again, I highly recommend you go after this and watch the entire thing. I'm just going to react to the things that really stood out to me the most, the things that are, in my opinion, the most damning and the most egregious. So let's go ahead and get into that. I guess I should issue a trigger warning before we begin. This deals with some pretty heavy stuff, toxic purity culture crap, and really inappropriate relationships between adults and minors, and a whole host of other things that tends to just come with the territory whenever we are talking about Opus Dei, unfortunately. So if you are a sensitive audience for those types of topics, proceed with caution. There's a pretty good little intro to this whole thing. I'm gonna let that play through so you can get an idea of what the whole video is like, and then we'll go into dissecting some of these specific parts that stood out to me.
Beneath the bucolic surface of Sydney's suburban hills district lie secrets and shame. Former students of local private schools are grappling with a troubling question. What happens when freedom of religious expression strays into misinformation?
These young people are being taught ridiculous things that are unsafe. And it's just okay. It's just seen as okay, and it's just not.
Pornography was going to cause physical holes in your brain.
That's right.
Graduates of schools associated with an obscure but powerful Catholic organisation are speaking out for the first time.
I know there's kids going through that schooling system right now who are experiencing exactly what I did, and it's miserable. It is hell on earth, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
Why isn't the public aware of this? How is this all happening behind closed doors?
These schools follow the principles of Opus Dei. New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet has spent his entire life in this Sydney school community. It's nurtured his political ascendancy.
The Perrottets are a very large family. They've been at the schools for a very long time.
People connected to the schools and Opus Dei are revealing how they were expected to engage in practices they now believe are damaging.
You showed us lists of Year 9s that you were hoping to recruit to Opus Dei.
Yeah.
So you were thinking about those Year 9s
Yes.
while you were whipping yourself.
Yeah.
In this episode of Four Corners, inside the secret world of the schools and study centres connected to Opus Dei, the conservative Catholic organisation with links to the powerful. These schools are heavily subsidised by Australian taxpayers and attended by the children of high-profile politicians. But dozens of former students have told Four Corners they are permanently scarred by their education.
So, as we get into this, there are a few things that really impressed me after watching this entire documentary. The first thing that I really have to give props to this team for doing is they do a really excellent job of laying out the modus operandi that is employed in these schools when Opus Dei is going after literal underage children for recruitment into Opus Dei. Because, spoiler alert, that is ultimately where all of this is going. So, after watching this documentary, there is absolutely no reason why a person with access to the internet could not go on, do a couple of keyword searches on Google, and determine whether or not there is an Opus Dei school in your city or a city near them. I highly recommend that you do that. If you have not done that yet, it is pretty fucking eye-opening. The other thing that I really like is they do a good job of illustrating how these schools are going after the children of the elites. And by saying elites, I don't mean people who are like part of some conspiratorial cabal. I just mean people who have won the generational wealth / economical success jackpot and are at the top of the societal food chain. These are the kinds of people that send their children to these really prestigious private schools like the two being showcased in Four Corners, like Tangara and Redfield. I think that that is really, really telling for all of the reasons that I have already mentioned in previous videos, plus the reasons that are brought up again in this video. It is just confirmation on confirmation on confirmation of everything that myself and so many other people have been saying for so long up to now. There is a very intentional, focused agenda, and once you know what to look for, it is not hard to see.
How important was purity to the central ethos of the school?
I think for girls, purity is everything.
I think purity was our most prized characteristic above anything else about ourselves.
We were given a piece of sticky tape and asked to pass it from person to person all the way around the class. And by the time it got to the last person, the teacher asked the class, what value does this sticky tape have anymore?
Okay, that part hit me like a punch in the gut because it brought up a memory, a deeply recessed memory from my own Catholic upbringing. A lot of people seem to assume, those that are not necessarily a fan of my content here, that I don't know what I'm talking about even when it comes to the Roman Catholic Church. And that could not be further from the truth. I was raised a cradle Catholic. All of my earliest memories are shaped and influenced by the church and by my parents, who were very devout, still are very devout Catholics. And I remember when I was 12 or 13 years old, going to a retreat at a Catholic university called Steubenville. Some of you probably know where that is. And everybody was divided up. There was a whole bunch of kids at this thing. And everybody was divided up into little classes, and you kind of went around to different speakers throughout the day. And I think there was Mass at one point, and adoration at another point, and confession at some point throughout the day as well. To my best recollection, I believe it was an event put on by Regina Chaley. I don't think it was an Opus Dei thing, is my point, but we did this exercise in one of the classes. I don't think it was sticky tape. I think we used a piece of paper, like a piece of note paper, and it was given to one girl, and it was just a room of us girls, obviously, because they would split everybody up to do the sexual shaming, right? You don't do that with everybody in the same room. You divide and conquer. And so they had a group of us girls in a room, and they gave a piece of paper to the first girl in the first row, had her crumple it up, and then try to smooth it out and hand it to the girl next to her. And she crumpled it up and tried to smooth it out. And so it went on down the line until it got to the back, and it was a completely wrinkled piece of paper that was honestly pretty close to just kind of fraying and coming apart. And the message was the same as the message that these girls were told at Tangara. Who would want to use this piece of paper now that has been crumpled up and used by everybody else? It's useless. And that was the message that I was introduced to from one of my earliest points in my young adulthood, one of my earliest lessons on my sexuality and what it meant. The impact that leaves on a child's psyche, you will be unpacking that for years. Hopefully, if you are privileged enough, with a therapist who knows what they're doing. That's what I have done. And I know that I am not alone, and it breaks my heart that this kind of disordered thought is still going on. And just wait, because it gets better. Worse, but this video continues to make my point for me.
Sticky. It doesn't fulfill its function anymore. And the teacher said to us, that's what happens to you when you have sex before marriage, when you have multiple partners.
It doesn't fulfill its function anymore. Ladies and gentlemen, let me be the first to tell you, if no one has ever told you this before, you are not a piece of sticky tape. You are not a piece of chewing gum. You are not a piece of notepaper. You are a human being with free will and lived experiences and much more that goes into your makeup than the materials that go into making a piece of paper or a piece of tape. You are a sentient being, and you have value and worth far greater than the one single thing that you have to offer. This makes me see red. The fact that children are still being exposed and taught this toxic religious twaddle. That is all I know to call it. It is just toxic religious twaddle.
You're not worthwhile anymore because you're dirty and unusable.
The concept of purity was inculcated into these young women at a private school in Cherrybrook in Sydney's northwest, called Tangara School for Girls. Tangara and its brother school, Redfield College, follow the philosophy of Opus Dei's Jose Maria Escrivá.
His argument that the parents should create home as a sort of church, as a domestic church, and that the role of education was to be a partner with the parents in this religious worldview formation.
That is an Opus Dei dog whistle. I want you to pay attention and remember that, because it's going to come up again throughout this discussion about Opus Dei in education. The idea that education is supposed to partner with the parents. Partner with the parents. That is a dog whistle, and you will see it mentioned again. If you are looking at a school trying to determine whether or not there's an Opus Dei influence and they're not being terribly overt about it, listen or look for that phrasing that tells you everything that you need to know. I would bet you dollars to donuts it's an Opus Dei school, because they all say the same thing. It's like they follow a script.
The schools were established by a group of parents in the 1980s known as the Pared Foundation.
These schools are not part of the Catholic system, although they do provide Catholic chaplains, Opus Dei chaplains. The people who set up these schools, very pragmatically and sensibly took advantage of the fact that in Australia we provide significant state aid to independent schools. And now I would say that Opus Dei's biggest realm of influence in Australia and where it is able to get the most traction is through these educational structures.
We were all given what was called a tutor at school. Your tutor, who would be one of the teachers at the school, would knock on the door and would take you out of your class for 10, 15 minutes to just have a chat about you and your life and where you are spiritually.
And on the face of it, having somebody who's invested in your child, of course that sounds lovely. Unfortunately, that person who's invested in your child has their own agenda
Which is what?
Which is recruitment into Opus Dei.
We're literally getting it as near from the horse's mouth as we possibly can. I have said for a really, really long time, and so many other people have said this too, that these schools with the Opus Dei presence, their sole reason for existing in those schools is to recruit future members from these pools of very wealthy, influential people. I have hypothesized what the reasons might be for that, and we can certainly speculate, but the fact remains that for better or for worse, it's happening. And, there's an argument that could be made for joining a club like this. Oh, it's just an after-school program. It's a way for kids to become more involved in their faith. There are Catholic parents out there who would be very in favor of something like that. The problem is, this is not just some fun, chill club that you go and hang out with your Catholic school chums. There is so much implicit to being in Opus Dei that people don't find out about until it's essentially too late. And plus, the very nature of the organization is such that parents realistically are risking losing their children forever, which is something that they also do not realize. It's a PR nightmare, in my opinion. And it would seem to me that, just playing devil's advocate here for a second, that if Opus Dei was serious about trying to recruit people and actually keep them, there are better ways to go about doing that than what they're doing here. But then again, I have also hypothesized that the recruitment is more of a means to an end. It's not the end in and of itself. And I think that that could be why their recruitment tactics are, quite honestly, sort of sloppy. It's not elegant.
Many students attend after-school study centres, which the schools claim are separate, yet heavily promote them in newsletters seen by Four Corners.
If you were to go to the Narana Study Centre after school, one of the numeraries who lived in that facility would tap you on the shoulder. They would ask you about your life and have you started to notice girls and what do you think about girls and have you thought about joining Opus Dei?
So, Alex, you have a list of names here of people. It says year 9. What's this?
That's a list of the girls that I was working with at the study centre. I was helping, trying to get them closer to God, but also possibly see their vocation to Opus Dei. We were really encouraged to have a list so that every month you could kind of report back on what things you'd actually done with those people individually. So they keep track of everything. Like, there was a literal folder that had these people's names in it.
But I'm looking at this. It says year 9. Like, these are 14-year-olds.
Yeah, look, I definitely think Opus Dei tries to attract people quite young, because when you're that young and you're a teenager, you see the world in an idealistic way.
Opus Dei has flat out denied so many times that this is something that they engage in, that they will keep lists and target people and keep tabs on people that they are going after, love bombing people in an effort to get them to join. But I mean, these are your canaries in the coal mine. And this is just a couple of examples. These are just 2 schools in one country out of all of the entire world that Opus Dei has managed to infiltrate. That's why I think this video is so incredibly powerful and why I think people need to see it, because just because of the nature of what the work is, if it's happening in these 2 schools, it's happening in every single one of them. I would bet you all of the money in my bank account right now that it is happening in every single school. And I don't care what Opus Dei apologist comes on here or comes at me in my DMs telling me that I am wrong. I refer you to my sources, sir, ma'am, take it up with them, because methinks the lady doth protest too much.
Alex was a numerary. She lived in the study centre with another numerary, Katrina Alvear, a teacher at Tangara.
Katrina Alvear definitely had a list. As a popular tutor for people that were in their teen years, she seemed to be able to bring up the conversation of vocation much more successfully than other numeraries.
So from what you saw, Katrina Alvear was trying to recruit teenagers to Opus Dei.
Definitely.
I have said it before and I will say it again. This is just so incredibly unethical. When you are underage, your ability to consent to things that are going to have lifelong consequences is so incredibly limited. You have no business, in the vast majority of cases, making that kind of a decision if you are under the age of 18. And even 18, frankly, seems really, really young. And I'm saying that as someone who left home and joined the military when I was 18. Looking back on that now, it just seems so incredibly young to be making a decision with such permanent ramifications like this. It just makes my heart hurt.
The Pared schools and Opus Dei denied in statements they attempt to recruit students and say they do not encourage
Lies.
the practice. The allegations go further.
And we just wanted to make sure that you knew about purity and love. Okay.
Katrina Alvear is the teacher behind the camera filming this video of Year 8 girls to be presented to their Year 12 future selves.
Awesome. Year 12.
Year 12s.
2000 and...
2000.
Hey, future me, Year 12. Okay, remember that believe in yourself and believe in God, because, like, your virginity is a diamond, and you have to save it and keep it clean until you get your husband.
Four Corners has spoken to several young women in the video who graduated in 2015. They are now disturbed by the messaging they were given.
Yeah, so just cover those knees.
Good stuff. Yeah.
I was saying that you should respect yourself and then not be sluts.
Bye, future me. Okay.
The way she encourages the girls to talk about themselves, you know, these young girls are saying to their future selves, please don't be a slut when I grow up. And Miss Alvear's behind the camera laughing. She's a teacher. She's in a position of power.
So I will offer up another little personal anecdote here, because I want to say that while this type of behavior and this whole purity culture thing is so incredibly toxic, it is not unique to Opus Dei. It has infiltrated most sectors of conservative religion, and I would guess that probably spans across the board. I would bet that you would find that in most extremely conservative religions, Christian and non-otherwise. There's a hyper fixation on sexuality, and particularly on women's sexuality, and on repressing that, and certainly repressing anything that does not manifest as the accepted norm. So if you didn't grow up in purity culture, if you weren't exposed to that kind of thing, consider yourself lucky, because it is pernicious. And once those seeds are planted, it really does take a lifetime to uproot them all and plant better things in their place. So sort of in the same vein as that Steubenville retreat that I mentioned that I went to that one time, there was always this type of purity narrative sprinkled into nearly every single thing that I did in the church that was geared towards young people. This type of purity stuff was just in there. And it is insidious because you don't realize that it has taken root until you are really faced with it. And I will never, ever, ever forget when I was forced to reckon with it myself. I was 19 years old. I was in the military by this point. I was on my own. And we had to do a training for helping and responding to sexual assault, sexual trauma. And unfortunately, it's something that is pretty common in the military. And the presenter that was giving the talk at that particular time had a whole spiel talking about how it's important to be sensitive to the needs of the victim, to reinforce for the victim that it is not their fault and that they did not ask for this and that they are not the ones who are guilty and that the guilty parties are the ones who deserve to be held responsible. Very basic, I'm sure what most people would consider common sense ideas around dealing with a victim of a really sick crime like sexual assault. But to my ears and to the ears of several other people that were in that room with me, this was complete and utter news. And I feel so sick admitting this now, but again, you cannot know what you don't know. But once you know better, you do better. And I've tried to do that because I did not know up until that point that a victim of sexual assault is not the one who is at fault for the thing that happened to them. That it does not matter what you are wearing, what you were doing, or where you were at. That does not give someone the right to have unfettered, unrestricted access to your body. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And God bless this speaker for having the patience to deal with a room of rather disgruntled people being told that the perspective that they had been raised with their entire life was toxic and wrong. She did it with such grace and patience. I am sure that it could not have been easy for her to deal with a room of what was essentially teenagers, 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, and having to tell them that, no, actually, when someone's the victim of a violent crime, it's not their fault. Can you believe it? It's not their fault. When you're raised in this environment, that is not something that is generally emphasized. And even though someone may have not come up to me and said, hey, if you're raped, it's definitely your fault. But it was implicit in everything else that was said. It was, oh, well, good girls don't do fill in the blank, don't wear fill in the blank. Oh, well, what was she wearing? I'm not even kidding when I say that that kind of thing happened. There is a reason why I was so incredibly surprised when that instructor told us what she told us, and why it was so hard for me to reframe my thought process around rape and sexual assault. That came from somewhere, and I am pretty sure I know where. And those same roots have spread into everything, and it's not surprising that they've spread into Opus Dei. I know that that's a little bit of an aside to all of this, but I think that does a really good job of illustrating how genuinely insidious this purity culture bullshit is, and how it can poison your mind and you don't even realize it, can make you say and do some really terrible things because that's what you think is right. And it's really, really sad.
As well as being expected to wear the spiky barbed wire-like silice around her thigh, the 18-year-old Numeri was also given a discipline with which to whip herself while she prayed.
So you showed us lists of year nines that you were hoping to recruit into Opus Dei. You were thinking about them as you were whipping yourself.
I think it's difficult to hear those words spoken back to me because when I think of it now, it seems so wrong.
children, effectively.
Yeah, that's right.
I think the word that she was looking for was repugnant. It is repugnant that this is something that is happening. And I'm not a psychologist, but I would love to get a psychologist's take on this because I feel like there is something really deep going on here. You put these relatively young people, I mean, she was 18 years old when she became a celibate numerary, in these really high pressure environments like Opus Dei creates. I mean, it's essentially a pressure cooker in these centers, right? And you place all this pressure on these individuals to continue to recruit for the organization because, let's be real, that's where a lot of the time and energy goes. I mean, you can see the proof in the pudding here. And then you are told to practice self-mortification in an effort to get more people. I'm sure that there's a mental thought process there. I'm not feeling creative enough to go through the gymnastics to get there myself, but that has got to be doing something to your brain. And then the fact that these were children that she was whipping herself over, it's really sick and it's disordered. And to be clear, I don't blame this particular individual. She is as much a victim as anybody else. She was way too young to be in that environment. She did not stand a chance. The blame is not solely on her shoulders. Yes, she was the one that was doing it, but when you are placed in an environment like that, it's like your free will gets hobbled and your critical thinking just goes right out the window. I don't find it surprising at all that she was doing something like that, knowing what I know about the organization and how incredibly intense it is. But it is absolutely repugnant.
It makes me extremely angry. I think that the schools are completely dishonest about what they are. I think a lot of the parents at the schools are actually in the dark about what is happening inside those schools.
I mean, you have to think so, right? What rational, normal, loving, caring, capable parent would ever willingly place their child in an environment like this? Even if you would support your child going into the religious life later in life, I think the idea is always that that is a decision you make as an adult with a fully formed conscience and with independence. You're not coerced into it from the moment you walk through the doors of your high school at 14 years old. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things should go die alone.
As well as anger about these practices of what Opus Dei numeraries were expected to do, Tangara alumni are also disturbed at being taught false information. One of the things that most concerns them is negative messaging about the HPV cervical cancer vaccine that is given to Year 7 and 8 students in schools across Australia.
The school sent home a letter to the parents saying that we have to offer this to the girls. We recommend that they don't get it because it promotes promiscuity. It encourages them to sleep around and be unvirtuous to their future husbands. From what I can tell, 3 or 4 people out of a class of 35, it worked. The letter worked. There were only a few of us that went and got the vaccine.
Vaccinated young women describe a so-called walk of shame. Sam Green recalls a teacher's reaction when she raised her hand in class to say that she and another student had to go for their injection.
She launched into us and, was telling us it was a terrible idea for us to go and get this vaccine. It's encouraging us to sleep around. We are going to be sluts when we're older, all these sorts of things. I raised the very valid point with her that I could get this virus from my husband. And she basically told us to not come back after we'd had the vaccine back to that class.
A parent of a graduate of the class of 2020 told Four Corners she was called to a school meeting where the vaccine was discussed. She was horrified to hear it being discouraged on the grounds that the girls wouldn't need it because they would only have one sexual partner. When another mother challenged this, There was a noticeable cooling in the room, and she was stared down by other parents in attendance, and her comment was not responded to by the presenters.
Tangara admits it wrote to parents about the vaccine prior to 2020, when it claims it was relatively new. By 2020, the vaccine had been given in schools for 13 years. The school's statement says they now provide information to students that's in line with accepted medical advice.
So we were given a worksheet in class with this image.
So they're going to get into some really ridiculous stuff about pornography here, but I want to circle back to the HPV vaccine thing because this is a pretty big deal and it's pretty common. I remember when the HPV vaccine first came out and became widely available here in the United States. It was back around 2009 or 2010, maybe even a little bit earlier than that. I can't quite remember. But I do remember the moral outrage from everybody in the Catholic sphere about this thing. I grew up listening to a lot of EWTN. I actually have met some of the people that have had shows on EWTN back in my youth, and it was a big part of my growing up. And even when I was younger, I enjoyed listening to it too. But anyway, I digress. I remember so many of the talk shows talking about this HPV vaccine. And I remember one show in particular, this woman called in. It was like a call-in type thing where you ask questions. And this woman called in and said that they'd gone to their annual checkup with their children, and her daughter was 13 years old, and their pediatrician offered their daughter the HPV vaccine because it was available now. And her response was, "Oh, I'm not going to need that. I know what kind of girls that's for." Very subtle slut shaming, right? Very subtle. And this mother and daughter were lauded for being so virtuous and so in touch with reality, and good for you, Mom, you're doing the right thing. That's exactly the kind of attitude we want our daughters to be raised with. There is certainly a conversation to be had about vaccines and vaccine safety. That should be a part of every conversation you have with your doctor anytime you are considering getting a type of vaccine. They include that insert with the vaccine for a reason, so that the consumer or the patient can practice informed consent. But that is not what this is. This has no basis in reality. It has no basis in science. It has no grounding in anything other than, from what I can see, some very antiquated Victorian idea of female purity. But you would be shocked by how incredibly common it is. And I am not at all surprised to see it represented here as well. I mean, why not? We know Opus Dei is a very conservative Catholic organization. I mean, that's one of the things that they platform themselves on, practically. Again, this goes back to the conditioning and everything, but I remember that in a year after hearing that radio program, going to the doctor and our pediatrician asking me if I wanted the vaccine, and me making a very similar comment. And this doctor kind of looked at me and kind of looked at my mom, and I think she knew. I think she could put two and two together, and she knew to leave well enough alone. I am sure she had some thoughts. And God bless her for not saying anything. I would have had a hard time biting my tongue, because there's just so much wrong with that idea. There's so much wrong with the idea that the only safe sex is with your husband, and that the only sex worth having is with your husband, or that if you only have sex with your husband, then everything will be okay and you will lead a charmed, perfect life full of sexual fulfillment. We all know that that is not the case. A real quick scroll through Reddit will show you that there are so many people on there talking about sexual dysfunction and the role that religion played in creating that. And then also to say nothing of people who've been sexually assaulted. Imagine what it's like for a child who's been sexually assaulted or molested to hear that they don't have any worth if they have already been with someone sexually before marriage, or hearing that they're not going to need this because the only person they're ever going to have sex with is their future hypothetical spouse. It makes me really, 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 really angry. And again, I think it's just sloppy. If you want to have a nuanced conversation about vaccines through the lens of religion, you can do that. But maybe an independent school that isn't even a religious school to begin with isn't the place to do that. I don't know. It's just a thought. I'm not advocating for those kinds of conversations, by the way. I'm not saying that I think that that's good or right or anything like that. I'm just saying that if you want to do that, if that's something that's important to you, there is a way in which you can go about doing it, and this ain't it. That's all I'm saying.
So we were given a worksheet in class with this image, and our religion teacher told us that the images were MRIs of brains with physical holes in the brain tissue.
So where are the holes?
So these dark places here that are illuminated, which are really just the basic anatomy of the brain, we were told that those were the holes caused by pornography.
That pornography was going to cause physical holes in your brain.
That's right. And myself and my best friend at the time sort of immediately knew that, that wasn't real, because it would kill you if you had holes in your brain.
Isabella's mother was so concerned, she requested a meeting at the school.
We were essentially told that truth and fact is secondary to, your ethos. And
in a school,
yeah.
Man, they really start the thought policing young, don't they, in Opus Dei? I mean, you gotta hand it to them. They don't waste any time. Again, there is a conversation to be had about the ethics of pornography. It's something that I am pretty well educated in myself, because there is a link between pornography and human trafficking. That is a conversation that is worth having. There is actual data, scientific data, numbers, statistics, things that you can hang your hat on that are physical concepts that you could center this kind of conversation around. You don't need to show students fake pictures of supposed holes in the brain, which is such an erroneous idea anyway. But maybe it's like, if we can convince them that watching porn will cause holes in the brain, what else can we convince them of next? Like, let's just push the envelope a little bit more every single time. Let's start sprinkling some of this stuff in there. And if you can get a kid to accept that, like, oh yeah, wow, porn isn't very good. It's not very nice. And wow, I mean, these pictures, it sure looks like those are holes. I mean, that's a perfectly circular spot. And look, there's a couple of them. Like, maybe porn does make holes in your brain. And maybe if I masturbate, I'll grow hair on the palms of my hands and all of these other ridiculous things. But you convince people to believe them. It's easier to convince them of even more ridiculous things later on down the line. And you completely cripple someone's ability to think critically, practically before they even formulate the ability to think critically at all. Good on her and her friend for having the clear-sightedness to realize that this was complete and utter horseshit, and then to call it out. Like, that's a bad bitch move. Just straight up.
Tangara received $5 million in government funding in 2021, up by $2 million in just the previous 5 years. Pared's 4 schools in Sydney received more than $20 million in government funding in 2021.
If they're receiving this level of taxpayer funding, why aren't they accountable to the taxpayers? Why isn't the public aware of this? How is this all happening behind closed doors?
When I got to Tangara, there were sections of textbooks blacked out, like with texter, that related to sex education. This is really about access to information about female health.
It's the state-approved curriculum.
Exactly.
Is religious freedom ever an excuse for teaching students information that's demonstrably untrue?
Never. You go to school to learn about things that are true things which are provable. You don't go to school to be given misinformation and lies.
Here's the thing. If a group of parents decide that they want their children to be educated in a tightly controlled environment that reflects precisely their worldview, and they get up the capital to make it happen, it might be shitty, but they have every right to do that. The thing that I take issue with is when these operations are put into practice and then they find a way to receive more funding from sources that do not realize what it is they are funding. Let's put the shoe on the other foot for a minute, right? There are people on the left and on the right of the political spectrum who are completely fine with this type of underhanded behavior so long as it benefits the thing that they are supporting. As soon as they catch someone on the other side doing the same thing, oh my gosh, can you believe that they are exposing these children to this type of problematic information? You see it happen on both sides of the aisle. It's not okay on either side, to be clear. People have a right to know what it is that their taxes are paying for. They have a right to know where that money is going, what it is funding, what people are using it for. That is part of living in a democratic society. And this is just incredibly dishonest. I mean, it's a lot of things, but at the most base level, it is just completely dishonest. And you better believe it's happening here in the United States and in Canada too. It's happening everywhere. You just haven't noticed it yet.
Four Corners has spoken to more than 30 former students of Tangara and Redfield, graduating between 2001 and 2021. Some of them come from strictly observant families, including founding parents of the schools. And if identified, these young people risk being ostracised by their families and their communities. Some of them are very recent graduates, with siblings still at the schools.
One religious education class, our teacher showed us a documentary on how the abortion and the birth control pill causes cancer.
Without getting the approval or consent of parents, we were then shown this video. It depicts cartoon images of fetuses with their limbs being ripped off.
Girls cried. You know, it was emotive stuff. I was watching it thinking, well, this isn't true. This isn't how it happens. This is completely incorrect.
There is a conversation here. That's the thing that is so incredibly frustrating to me. And I think I understand why, but there's a conversation to be had here. And it's like they completely miss the boat. If you want to come at this thing from like a religious or an ethical perspective, you can do that, and you can have engaging conversations centered around that concept. You can really find a lot of common ground with people and do a lot of good. Obviously, that's not the goal here, right? The goal is just complete and total indoctrination, a because we said so type of mindset.
One of the stories Tangara graduates are most disturbed by is about a young martyred saint, Maria Goretti, who was stabbed 14 times rather than allow her neighbour to rape her.
I feel sick when I think about my education. Maria Goretti is one of the things I always think about.
Maria Goretti was only 11 years old.
She made the decision that she would rather die than go to hell for being a victim of rape. And we were taught to glorify her and revere her as a symbol of chastity and purity and virginity, and a teen saint that we should aspire to be like in our daily lives. The message that we got was definitely that once your virginity was gone, you were worthless.
Even if you're raped.
Exactly, yeah.
Maria Goretti is a huge deal in conservative Catholic circles. She was a huge deal for me and my friends growing up, and I think probably still is, based on some of the things that I have seen coming out of the traditional Catholic community. And as a child, being exposed to that story is really, really traumatizing. I think I heard that story for the first time when I was 10 or 11 years old, before I even really understood what rape was and what that meant. Just the idea of this violence being inflicted upon this young girl who was at that time not so much older than me, trying to imagine myself in that situation was absolutely terrifying. And then you have all of this other stuff added onto it, the whole like worthlessness aspect and the purity aspect and the fighting to keep yourself sexually pure for your husband, right? Because it's all for the man, you know. The man's the only one that matters here. It's all for him and his gratification. Ultimately, that's really what it comes down to. Like, let's just be fucking honest here. That causes some really deep damage that it takes a long time to work through. And you can tell in the faces of these interviewees, they're still working through it themselves, and some of them are older than I am.
The idea was that men couldn't control themselves, basically. Men had these urges, and I don't know, women supposedly didn't, and it was kind of our responsibility to help men, I suppose, by not tempting them.
Men are wild stallions and it's up to women to hold the reins.
Yeah.
Men are like dogs, and if you put the food in front of them, they have to eat it.
These messages have been communicated even to the most recent graduates.
I can never remember ever being taught any form of consent education, besides being told how men might take our short dresses and excessive makeup as consent, blaming us for giving them that idea. Like leaving the door unlocked for a robber.
We were told it was our fault for making a man lust us. I was depressed because I had been sexually assaulted. The teacher said we are making our hearts dirty when we have sex with more people.
I hope you don't mind me interjecting my own personal perspective on this thing. The whole topic of purity culture is one that is, I say, near and dear to my heart. I hold no affection for it, but it did shape in a very significant way my perspective of myself and other women and the role that I occupy in the world. So hearing these types of beliefs being espoused so many years after I've been kind of out of that space, it brings up a lot of really intense emotions. I am angry for the sakes of these children and adults that were put through this environment, but I'm also angry for the sake of myself, because we were all so young and had absolutely no say in the type of education that we were given. And, you know, when it comes to purity culture, and I'm trying very hard to separate this out from the discussion of religion, one, because purity culture, I think, has bled into a lot of social groups. I don't think it's necessarily just landlocked to religion, but also because I don't want to alienate those of my audience who are still extremely religious or still Catholic. In the discussions and information that was presented to me from this purity culture space, which was usually in a church setting, but that's only because that is where 90% of my social interactions came from when I was growing up, there was really no talk of consent. There was no talk of the idea that sex should feel good for the woman too, that sex is about more than just reproduction. They would attempt to sprinkle that stuff in there, almost like breadcrumbs, to try to keep the audience engaged so that you would sit and listen to everything else that they were shoving down your throat. But don't get it twisted. Like, it's not about protecting and educating women, regardless of how it might masquerade. Failing to teach young people, boys and girls alike, that sex should feel good, that it should be in a safe environment where you feel loved and protected, that it's okay to say no, and that if someone does not respect the fact that you said no, then that is on them and not on you. That was not reinforced. Perhaps in some circles now it's changed, and I really, really hope that it has, but at least in the case of these Opus Dei schools, it has not, man. We are firmly ensconced in some 1980s purity culture shtick. It's pretty wild because the playbook hasn't changed.
And what I usually find is...
Opus Dei numerary and mentor Martin Fitzgerald has taught at Redfield College for 3 decades. Blog posts written by Mr. Fitz, as he was known by the boys, include in 2021 saying he doesn't believe in consent training for schoolboys. He says teaching abstinence is the only solution. In 2017, this was his response to the Harvey Weinstein scandal.
Sex is too powerful an urge to be negotiated. The very notion of rational consent to powerful passions, especially when alcohol is involved, is absurd. Who was the bright spark who came up with the laughable proposal that men ask consent of women every step of the way? It's absurd to expect men to stop midstream and ask permission for the next move.
Here's the thing, Fitzy. If a couple is in a consenting, safe, positive relationship, it's not something that you have to do every single step of the way because there is an understanding between those two people. I understand you yourself may have never been in such a relationship, and that certainly is a shame, especially for whoever was on the receiving end of your ideological perspective. But your worldview is not representative of the whole. This is incredibly harmful.
Redfield says Martin Fitzgerald's views are not necessarily representing the views of the college, and he won't be teaching consent classes. It says it will follow the new New South Wales curriculum on consent. Pared says no children are victimised because of their sexual orientation. The alumni acknowledge the schools have a strong academic record and perform well in the HSC. Not all staff are teaching misinformation. But when they tried to bring their deep concerns about the schools to the attention of the New South Wales Education Standards Authority, they say they were told they had to go to the schools first.
I brought to their attention the fact that that wouldn't be effective because these are the school is built around these people's values and their families. Without an adequate complaints avenue, there's no hope of any of these issues being rectified because there's no platform for people to be able to even acknowledge wrongdoing.
The thing is, with these schools, this is not a private school that just so happens to have an Opus Dei priest on their staff or an Opus Dei numerary as one of the teachers of the class. No, the tail is fully wagging the dog. Opus Dei has a stranglehold not only on these schools, but also on the taxpayers and, as you're going to see here, on the government. It has gotten into every single facet of life and through very dishonest means. I can envision a reality in which a private school that wants to teach a very specific viewpoint could make sense insofar as much as a group of people are exercising their right to do that. I don't necessarily think that it's a good idea, but again, as long as they're being honest about that, it might be shitty, but it kind of is what it is. This is not that. This is very, very intentional deception to the point that these schools are straight up lying when they are caught red-handed, when they are called out for doing things, for redacting textbooks, keeping information from students. about things like sexual health, which is a really, really big deal. You're going to live with that for your entire life. And then they go, oh, well, we haven't redacted textbooks since 2017. Ah, yes, the dark ages of 2017. So long ago, we've evolved since then. Ma'am, that wasn't that long ago. 2017 was just right in the rear view. And you expect us to believe that everything's just all better now. Now you're following the New South Wales education standards. Sure. Very convenient, by the way, that you've only just now started to do that in time for all of this to come out about your alleged past behavior. I don't know. I smell a rat. I'm not buying it. Let me know if you think that I'm off base for that. I'm not buying it.
For such a small community, these schools have a large imprint on the political class in New South Wales, including Premier Dominic Perrottet.
The Premier was school captain at Redfield, and his siblings went to Redfield and Tangara. The children of his finance minister, Damien Tudhope, also attended the schools, and numerous other current and former politicians and political staffers here at the New South Wales Parliament are also linked to the schools.
I guess the elephant in the room, my uncle, Damien Tudhope, he's very big in the Pared Opus Dei community there.
He's the Finance Minister in New South Wales.
Finance Minister of New South Wales, I believe the leader of the upper house of the New South Wales Parliament. So all of my cousins, all of Damien's children went to Redfield and Tangara.
So the rest of this video focuses on the political significance of these schools. And if you haven't watched this entire video, like I said, go back and look through it. I'm not going to focus too heavily on the political aspect right now, just because for one thing, it's not really news to me. If you've been watching my videos up to now, it shouldn't be news to you either. If you have had experience with Opus Dei, it's not news. Just the only thing that I will say about it is that we have a perfect textbook example right here with receipts of what exactly these schools are doing and how they are functioning and how they are setting their alumni, who are also oftentimes Opus Dei numeraries, supernumeraries, cooperators, up for success on a really grand scale. That is happening everywhere. And I say that with the utmost confidence and sincerity. The proof is in the pudding. All you have to do is look, and it's not very hard to put two and two together and figure out that what's happening here is happening everywhere. I really do have to hand it to Opus Dei, like school to school, continent to continent, the playbook does not vary much. It is pretty much standard par for course to enroll these children in a private high school when they're 14 years old, assign them a mentor, someone to oversee their academic and spiritual success, which sounds very lovely on the face of it. I mean, what concerned, caring parent wouldn't want that for their child? And then to start to lay on the pressure and to shuffle that child into the Opus Dei pipeline for success. So I just wanted to talk about some of those key points in this video that stood out to me. These are the things that stood out to me upon my initial viewing of it. I think the reason why I focus so heavily on the purity culture stuff and the impact that this environment has on the psychology of these children is because, again, as I said, they are literal children. I'm not talking about an adult who ostensibly can exercise informed consent in the decisions that they make, could choose to join Opus Dei of their own free will. I'm talking about someone who literally does not even stand a chance because of how young they are and the environment that they're in and the ideas about authority that are reinforced over and over and over again. You simply do not question certain things, especially in Opus Dei. And when you expose someone young to that perspective so early on, the impact that is going to have over the rest of their life, I mean, I think we're going to be unpacking it for a really, 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 really long time. And it makes me sick. And I just want to get this in front of parents, honestly. I want to get this content and this information in front of parents so that they can know what they are potentially signing up for, what they're signing their children up for. So anyway, that pretty much concludes my commentary on the Four Corners story about the 2 Parad schools in New South Wales, Australia. Everything will be linked down in the description below. Before I close out this video, I do want to mention a couple of things. First of all, if you are looking for some more content to enjoy aside from mine, I want to recommend the YouTube channel Opus Dei, which, by the way, is an absolutely fantastic name. I kind of wish I had thought of it myself, but it is a channel by a former Opus Dei numerary, and he spends anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes per video talking about certain little facets pertaining to life as an Opus Dei numerary, or just life in Opus Dei in general. And I highly recommend his videos. They are so clear and succinct and well put together. And I think the thing that stands out to me the most about them is the fact that, like I've said before, once you are involved in something like this for a really long time, your critical thinking skills can become incredibly hampered. You can more or less lose them entirely. And that doesn't mean that you can't get them back, but I know it's not easy. I know it's not easy to leave and to find your identity again and your sense of self and all of that. But he is able to convey his thoughts so clearly, and the critical thought that goes into them is so evident. So yeah, if you want to support someone else who is shedding light on this topic, please go and subscribe to his channel. I would love nothing more than for every single former member of Opus Dei to make a YouTube channel today and start talking about their experiences. I know that that can't happen for a variety of reasons, but man, if people started doing that, it would make a difference. Because the biggest lie that Opus Dei tells everyone is that you are alone in the things that you have experienced. The things that you have experienced are a result of your bad faith, not any wrongdoing on the part of the organization, and you will suffer endlessly for your decision to leave, because that is the closest that you will ever get to touching heaven. And boy howdy, friends, I'm here to tell you that that is just fucking wrong. And the more of us that stand up and start talking about this, the harder and harder it is going to be for Opus Dei to refute this. Do not let them tear you down. Last but not least, before I close this off, just on a personal note, I went on hiatus 8 months ago because I needed to finish up my bachelor's degree, because I was renovating the space that you see me sitting in now, and because my life at that point in time was just not constructed in such a way that I could do this work. I also think that I was a little bit overwhelmed by the enormity of it, and a little bit concerned that I was not going to be up to the task. Because when I made that first video over 3 years ago now, I had no idea that there would be the response that there has. I thought it would be a one-time kind of fun, weird video about this weird organization that seemed to me to be pretty creepy, and that was going to be it. And I had no idea the trajectory that it would set me on. I had no idea the numbers of people that would come out of the woodwork telling me their stories. I had no idea the reception that I would receive. And there has been a part of me throughout this whole thing that has been afraid that I am not up to the task, that I don't have the right words to tell these stories and to do them justice, that I'm not the right kind of person to be doing this, because maybe I don't look the way you would expect someone to look who is talking about things like canon law and the Vatican and the hierarchical structure of the Catholic Church and a religious organization like Opus Dei. I do have to acknowledge that there is probably a little bit of bias at play when people see me, and I'm concerned that that could do more harm than good. There was also the fact that at some point my family is going to find out that this is what I am doing, because I'm back, baby. I am here to stay. I've realized that this is not something that I can run from anymore, and that the demand is too great, and that for me to not talk about this would be a grave disservice to so many of you who have trusted me with your stories. But my family, they are very good people, and I love them very, very much. And my parents are very, very devout Catholics. And sometimes it is very hard for Catholics to hear a criticism of any part of the Catholic Church because it feels like blasphemy. I have certainly my own thoughts and perspective on the Catholic Church, but when I am talking about Opus Dei, it's not really the time for me to share that with my audience, because I am acutely aware of the fact that there are a large number of you who are still faithful Catholics, who have clung to your faith throughout this ordeal, and to whom it means a very great deal. And I don't ever want to downplay that or disrespect that, because my personal perspective of the church aside, I am able to recognize the positive role that a faith community and a spiritual practice can have on someone's mental, emotional, and even physical well-being. And I never want to alienate anyone from that audience. But I would be lying if I didn't say that I was nervous about having that conversation with my parents and trying to help them understand that my investigation into Opus Dei, my taking qualms with this organization and wanting to hold their feet to the fire on account of the things that they have done, is not an outright attack on the Catholic Church as well. Maybe I was just scared. I was just scared by it all, and I needed to step away, and the time was right. It needed to happen because of everything else, so that's what I did. But you can run, but you can't hide, and I think that regardless of whether or not I asked for the responsibility of telling these stories, it is still on me to do that to the best of my ability, and that is what I am going to do. So I'm back. I'm here. We're going to do our best to do this right. Thank you for trusting me with your stories. My camera is about to die, so I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll have a new video for you very soon.